Hello, I'm Robert, a fact-check and science blogger, and I help people on Doomsday Debunk on Facebook scared of many things. And this time it's about the COVID-19 outbreak, and this is the good news that the mainstream media just barely mention. And when they do, they sort of put in a footnote, a throwaway sentence, and they sort of say, oh, maybe they might be containing in China. There's a report that sort of said they were. It's not like that at all. They were absolutely certain. A team of 25 international experts, well 13 were international experts from outside China and 12 from inside China. They were independent of the WHO, independent of China, independent of the United States and their own national CDCs. They were asked to be just act as independent experts, and they did. And they set the entire agenda, not the WHO. They decided where they were going to go. They spent 2 weeks in China going through different places. They saw hospitals. They went to Wuhan, and because they knew how to take precautions, they went to Wuhan, went all the way around to Wuhan, saw all the hospitals, the doors of the fever clinics, the airport market, everything, and they were able to leave and say confidently to the press in Geneva that they were not contacts, because they'd always stayed 2 meters away from everyone, and they knew they didn't have the virus and they weren't in contact. This shows, by the way, that you can keep totally safe with this virus, even if you're in Wuhan, if you know what you're doing. Anyway, so they went around, they saw everything everywhere, and they agreed that the figures were correct, and they said that they had independent confirmation as they went around. Then, for instance, this is one of the provinces near Wuhan, and you can see out of 1,272 cases, 22 sadly died. There are still well over 1,000, 1,198 have recovered, and only 52 left still under treatment. They can be needing treatment for up to 6 weeks. And so it's absolutely clear that something is going on there, that they haven't quite contained it, but they almost contained it. There's very little infection left. And they said they got this independent confirmation. They went around and they found wherever they went, they were seeing hospitals with many empty beds, and the doctors were saying, well, we're now able to bring in the milder cases because we've got all the beds freeing. We turned into the more severe situations, and we've got all the big quarantine facilities that they set up with all these thousands of beds that you've seen photographs of, and many of those beds just empty. And then you go to the CT scanners, the fever clinics, and they said to them, well, towards the end of January, end of January, we had 500 people a day going through. Now we only have 50, and CT scanners just not being used because they weren't needed. And then people are doing clinical trials. Then they set up in Wuhan where they have the most patients, and still it's just not having enough of the severe patients that they need for these clinical trials of these drugs. And then there was a survey of all the fever clinics, and of 320,000 visitors, infections fell from 0.47% to 0.02%. Huge drop, absolutely huge drop. There's absolutely no doubt that they are controlling this, containing it. Why isn't this the top news? Why, when they released the report early last week, why wasn't it the top news item on all the mainstream media? It wasn't in any of them. Just a minor report in some minor global news, I think, had it. BBC didn't have it at all. Or the New York Times didn't have it. Instead, they were running a story by some epidemiologists that were saying that 60% of the entire population of the earth is going to get it, and there's not much we can do about it. He was out of date, and they just didn't run this story. Too good, I think. I don't think this is any kind of conspiracy thing. I think it's just that journalists just think they've got little headline light bulbs in their heads, as it were, and just, is this a headline? Is this going to be a clickbait? Is this going to get people clicking? And they look at this story and, yeah, That's not good fun. I think it's a bit like that. I don't think they're trying to scare people, but they just don't run these stories. Nobody's going to be interested in that, and we become on that. I don't know, I'm just guessing, but this is the best news we've had since the beginning of the outbreak, and nobody is running it. And so anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So I've got the independent confirmation here, I've written it all out there. You can go and explore it here. Go and look there. And so I'm going to click that for that one. Let's click at a few others. So click there, for instance, 990, 11 existing. 576, 120 left. Of course, Dubai. Then that's the big one. It's got 31,000 recovering, but it's 32,000 existing. But still, it's 2,000 deaths. But still, the numbers are way down, obviously. And over the whole of China, the number of new cases is down to 329 that was yesterday, which was less than it's been for a month. You can see that in this map here, this graphic here. Let's just maximize it. And there you can see all the Chinese cases were doubling every 3 days at the beginning. But if they were continuing doubling, they'd have gone up like that. They didn't. And now they're just leveling off. You're getting sometimes thousands every. This was a data thingy, that they suddenly changed the definitions, but which happens sometimes during an epidemic. But these, you'll get 1,000 extras every day. Now you're just getting a few hundred a day. Absolutely no doubt about this whatsoever. You can have a try, click about yourself. And so, now why is this not a pandemic? So I'll go through a bit more now of this. It's a debunk I've got. I'm going to put it up on my blog probably later tonight. So why is it not a pandemic? Like the WHO say, a pandemic is a unique situation in which we believe all citizens on the planet are likely to be exposed to the virus within a defined period of time. Now, if it was influenza, they would have called it a pandemic by now, because it's multiple epidemics in different countries, and there's no way you can contain. You couldn't have done that containment. It just wouldn't have happened. But with this, then they're saying it's unhelpful to declare a pandemic when you're still trying to contain a disease and it's got multiple epidemics. But if it was influenza, we would probably have called this a pandemic by now. But what we've seen with this virus is that with containment measures and a robust public health response, the course of this epidemic or these multiple epidemics can be significantly altered. And so influenza is just different. It spreads to children. It has non-symptomatic spreaders, and this doesn't have that. There is so very little evidence of any non-symptomatic spreaders. They just don't seem to be there. Certainly not a significant part. And so now here I'm going to share some of the dramatic graphs from. So you can see here he is sharing his graphs during the press conference that I watched. These absolutely extraordinary graphs. So this is the graph for Wuhan, and what you see, he said he's never seen anything like this. It's increasing like a pandemic. Normally a pandemic would go right up high, then come down the way it went up. Said it's going down in a very strange way that he doesn't recognise, which shows that it's being contained. And then even more striking, you see here pointing at China, the whole of China, that's Wuhan. This is all the same vertical scale. And this is the whole of China outside of Wuhan. That's Hubei province, outside Hubei province. And you can see it just didn't go up very far. This was an epidemic. I mean, there's far more people outside Hubei and outside Wuhan than now inside here. This should have been much higher. This should have been way up. Many times the height of that one. Instead, it just went like that. And this is what we can do in the rest of the world. Now, they found that they came to the conclusion that China, by doing this, then they have saved hundreds of thousands of infections in China. And of course, the more infections you have in China, the more people, the more Italians in China, or the more Iranians in China or whatever, the more people from around the world, Japanese and so on, that are going to be heading off around the world. And we would have had dozens of many more of these outbreaks around the world if China hadn't contained it the way they did. Instead of Iran, South Korea, and Iran, South Korea, and Italy, we would have had maybe a dozen or more outbreaks that big if it wasn't for what the work China did containing it. And so they are the first line of defence, and we, in the rest of the world, we are the second line. So Italy now has to contain it. If they don't, Italy is responsible for if it contains its outbreak, which it is doing very vigorously, then they are saving people in other countries, for instance in Africa. Africa is the really thing we've got to be very careful about. So we are the second line of defence. And it's not just responsibility for Italy, it's responsibility for the entire world, for Italy to contain its response, its outbreak, just like there was responsibility for the entire world for China. And this team said very, very clearly that there was a very strong spirit in China that they were doing this for the entire world. That they felt a very strong responsibility as ordinary individuals. I'm not talking about any kind of political thing, just your nurses and doctors and just the ordinary people in the street feeling we've got to stop it here so as to save the world from this virus. Not it's going to kill everyone, but it's certainly going to be, if it spread around the world, if it spread around the world back then. Suppose that already in late January we had outbreaks like Italy all around the world, that could easily have happened. Then we would just have not been prepared for it. So there's no doubt they've saved us a huge amount of trouble. And then we've got to act on this and be a second line and save it. That was a big, big message from this report. And I say nobody's reporting this in the mainstream news, it's just not being said. Bizarre. And that's about the fear of claim dropped 500 to 50. So yes, the world, and they already are, so, oh, a little typo, they already are. So what happened, what he said happened with his, when he talked to people after he'd come back from this report, the Brussels report, then he said that they'd say, oh, China can't be doing that, and then he would talk and they'd say, oh, okay, they are, I'm convinced, but nobody else can do that. So it's just kind of defeatist attitude. There's nothing we can do. And he says, well, yes, they did do it. Okay, well, okay, I accept what you said, yes, you have established that they did it, but then we can't do it. That's just so how defeatist is that? Of course we can do it. And the many cases where so here's Vietnam, for instance, and it hasn't had any cases for 2 weeks. 16 confirmed, 16 recovered, none left. Yes, there's India. And India has vast numbers of citizens of interplay with China, and it stopped foreign nationals from China to come into India, but just like with Singapore the same, then overseas nationals of India in China are permitted to come to India. It's quite strange. There's no scientific reason for this as far as I know. That's politically more difficult to keep them from visiting India, so they let anyone who's an overseas citizen of India and China to come back to India. Anyone in India can go from India to China. That's 1 billion people in India. Any of those over 1 billion, any of them can go to China anytime they want and come back again. But 1 billion or so people in China are not permitted to come to India. So it's quite bizarre. And the various other travel, Singapore has a similar travel restriction, which is only for Chinese people and not for Singaporeans. And so I don't think these travel restrictions are actually doing very much. But it's just the quarantining everyone, checking everyone, and tracing, and then it's just luck. So all the countries in the world, then a few of them, someone somewhere is going to be one of the ones where we get these big spreads. And there's all 9 of them that have just not happened. And it's just been 2 weeks with nothing happening except original cases. India is one of them with 1 billion people. And only 3 cases all recovered. And now here's Singapore. and as of last time I checked, 96 confirmed, 69 recovered, and 27 left. So it's obvious. Again, that's a bit like the cities outside of Wuhan in China. It's very clear from those figures that something is going on there. It's not just expanding like an epidemic. So how did Singapore do it? So China, we know, it's done the same thing as China. So it wasn't really the travel bans. Oh yes, let's go down to the Singapore. So here the Singapore bit, now go up to the lockdown bit. This is the curve for Singapore. And as you can see, it had these big jumps. It's still going up from time to time, but it's pretty much leveled off. That's the Singapore one, and these are the new cases for each day. And the way they did it is through tracing, and this is the trace. So these are the people that originally started it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or 9 people, I think. And some of those infected lots of others. And here, this one infected all the people, but then they didn't infect anyone else. But it just so happened that one of this cluster infected a big cluster, one of those infected a big cluster, and one of those infected a big cluster. And this is the way it goes. It doesn't go in little. It doesn't go just one or two at a time. You get these big leaps, and then these people who are infected, then they will start getting the disease. And so you see most of these people, and that's it. This is common in this outbreak with COVID-19. Most of them don't infect anyone. See, if you look at that, those didn't infect anyone, but that one did. All of those didn't infect anyone. A few infected a few others there. And all of those, only one infected another one there. And so this is very uninfectious. It's not like the flu. And that one infected loads and loads. So it works in a very different way from the way the flu does. And you don't typically infect someone by just walking past them in the street or being in the same bus with them. And people have flown all the way back from China, from Wuhan in China to other countries before they knew how infectious it was, how easily it could spread. And they didn't get it. And they check everyone within 2 meters on a plane, and they just don't get it. So it's not like the flu, and you don't have uninfectious spreaders. It is nearly all close contacts, and these are close contacts of some sort, or very prolonged contacts, and of various sorts, like that church in South Korea. Then they were doing a lot of hugging and singing at the same time, which seems to be something, maybe that was something to do with why it spread so much. In Iran, then sharing a particular kind of pipe that they smoke, and then they hand it on someone else without washing it. So the various things that are particular to particular places that make them a bit more vulnerable to it going on. So that's it. So that's how they did it, and that's how China's done it. Incredibly, with 500,000 contacts, and they traced up 500,000 people in this way. They have contact tracers, and so one of the lessons is, if the COVID-19 is going to hit your country, do you have 1,000 contact tracers that you can ring up and say, I know you're professional contact tracers, now's your day, please come and start contact tracing COVID-19. And do you have hospital wings that you can just make vacant to deal with all the quarantine if you get an outbreak like the Italian one? So it's all about being ready right now, and then you can do it. And you can go and zoom in on any of the cases there. You see there's a case to give all the individuals, male, female, male, female, female, male, and then sometimes they say something about them, a maid or whatever. And that's so I've got a little link there. If you want to go, you can go and explore the cases in Singapore there, and you've got this thing, and you can say, you can click that, scroll to zoom, so you go like that, and then it tells you all about them: tour guide, female. They would just say male or female. Sometimes it's a little bit about Indonesian maid, female, husband, baby son, 6 months who got it. Young kids often, they're not very much affected by it, but they can still get it, and then that's towards the end of the thing. So that's how they do it. but they would have huge maps with 500,000 people in them that they're tracing, and they did it with an awful lot of computer technology and AI and lots of programming and clever tools to enable them to trace absolutely all of those 500,000 contacts. I mean, can you imagine a map like that with 500,000 people in it that you have to trace? That's what China did and is doing. 500,000 people in a map like that. It's really quite mind-boggling and only possible with computers. And that is the key to stopping this thing. And and we absolutely know that these are all the cases in Singapore, because Singapore has there can be very little that isn't in that list, because Singapore does automatic screening, automatic sampling. If I had a cough or a sneeze and cold, flu, fever, and I go and see the doctor in Singapore, they will take a sample from me, and they will test that sample automatically for a whole number of different viruses, and all they've done is to respiratory viruses like the flu and colds and things. All they've done is add COVID-19 to a long list they do already. And throughout Singapore, if anyone goes to the doctor with a fever or cold or flu or whatever it is, then they will be automatically test and see if they've got COVID-19. And they haven't found any cases apart from the ones in this tree. These are all cases in Singapore that have been discovered to date. They're all connected back like that. This shows that there can't be a big hidden population of non-symptomatic spreaders. It's impossible, because it would have happened in Singapore. But even if you imagine there are quite a few non-symptomatic people that aren't picked up for some reason, they can't be infecting anyone. Because if they were, then sometime later on, someone would get a fever and a flu out of all of them. They would go to their local GP and they would be tested, and then they would appear, and then they would say, this person's appeared, and they must have got in a bus or must have got it in the street or something, because we can't contact trace them. This has simply not happened at all in Singapore. Out of 96 paid cases, not one has got it in the community. And this is why, and there's lots of evidence also from China, that there is essentially zero community spreading. So when they say community spread in the news stories, what they mean really is probably that there was a close contact that hasn't been traced yet. Maybe someone was suppressing their symptoms with paracetamol, so the person didn't know that their contact had it, and they would have to interview all the people that they'd met over the last 2 weeks to see if any of the people that they were in close contact with had the fever and were suppressing it. It's very difficult, and they might well be over it by now if it was 2 weeks ago. So that is why it really doesn't seem to be any community spreading. So all this bit about you should continually wash your hands and so on, that will protect you from flu for sure. And if you are in close contact with someone, caring for someone with COVID-19, then you wear the mask and you wash your hands frequently, and you absolutely should do it. And as for generally, like in the underground or the bus or the planes or whatever, so far there's no evidence it's needed, but they're just being cautious, super cautious. They don't want even if there is even a small amount of community spreading, they want to stop it. But so far there's no evidence of it. So really, if you've heard there's a case in your country, and like the 35 cases in the United Kingdom, but nobody's called around my door and said, Robert, we want to keep track of you because we think you're a contact, so therefore I'm not at any risk. I'm practically zero risk because I'm not a contact. And it's really only through contacts that this happens. So really there's an awful lot of hysteria and mistaken reporting on this. All this bit about hidden being, and so you're still getting these epidemiologists. Now, how do we then understand these epidemiologists that are going on, that are being interviewed and saying that they think it's a big hidden population? Well, partly they can't have read this report, or if they did, then they're so wedded to their own idea or welded to it even, that they are finding this too much of a challenge, and they just sort of, what happens in academia is that someone will publish a paper, maybe it's a landmark paper on the topic of COVID-19, and maybe they published it 2 weeks ago, and it's one of the major findings back then. And then this big report comes out that basically contradicts everything they said. Then they are not going to, that's what I'm just looking at what that is. I think that's the Italy one. They are not, is that Italy? No, yes, that's Italy. So anyway, these academics, they are not going to be too pleased, best pleased, and just in a purely kind of personal way, that their pet theory has been disproved. And it's very common in academia, and this happens all the time. And it's why you have faced so many checks and balances in science. They're just human beings, and this is expected. And so, and they tend to push their ideas and just stay with their ideas, despite conflicting evidence. And this is very common in science, but often the evidence itself conflicts with itself. So you then have someone else who falls the other direction, and then they discard the evidence that the first person weighs very highly. And then you get the truth eventually after the dialogue between these two and various other people who come along, and eventually you find out which is the actual real deal. So these people, if either they are completely out of date, which I find a little bit difficult to believe, but they don't mention this report, so which is quite strange. They don't sort of say, oh, I think that 60% of the, or recently someone said 80% of the population is going to be infected, and however, this report from China would suggest the opposite. But I think that report is wrong because they don't say that. They're not saying that at the moment. So they're either out of date, or they're just embarrassed, or whatever reason, they're just not mentioning the report. So if someone says that and they don't mention this report and don't explain why they've got any reason for thinking there's anything wrong with this report, just ignore them, because they're out of date or embarrassed, or for whatever reason are just not mentioning this. So now, what's happening, and they're just human beings like in any other field. So now what's happening in Italy? Well, it's going up very fast, and you just look at that huge leap there. So that might look very scary. It's well over 1,600. Well, what happened in Italy is that it must have been infected. I think it was a couple of weeks ago. There was one. They know where they've traced these cases back to a particular person, and this person didn't know he had it, and he did meet someone from China at one point, but not with any symptoms, and they don't even know if that person was how he got it. They may be out of date, and maybe they've found out now, but it's quite hard to tell if someone's over it, because until we have these serology tests, which are just beginning to come into place. They test your blood serum, and then they can check that you've even been over it, but even weeks later. So maybe eventually they'll sort it out. But anyway, they don't have patient 0, but they have patient 1, and he just wandered around. He didn't think he had it. He had absolutely no idea. And then he infected loads of people in Italy. So it just random chance thing. It happened in Italy. It could have happened here in the UK. And so, but it's very rare, because if you look at all the countries in the world, then only 3 of them are like that. There's do I have a list here somewhere? Let's bring this up. Let's just bring up. I just want to bring up this thing about how many countries in the world. I've got lists here somewhere, the number of them. You see, most of them just have one case. So, there's Nigeria, Egypt, Algeria. Look, Algeria, 1 case existing. Nigeria, 1 case existing. There was a lot of concern about this Nigeria case, but in the press and so on. But the thing is, actually, it's one of the best places it could be in Africa. The leader of the Nigeria CDC was one of the 13 international experts who had just returned from touring China for 2 weeks. And so he knows exactly, he's learnt all these lessons. He wrote the report on how China did it, and he is applying this in Nigeria. So I would say Nigeria, you couldn't have a better place for it to be in Africa, and they do have a lot of experience in dealing with epidemics, although obviously low GDP kind of country, and it's quarantined, and he's doing everything right. So I'm not worried about Nigeria particularly. You look at all these, one case in Sri Lanka, a few cases in Australia. So you just go and look around. Russia was one of the ones. It's only 2 cases, both recovered. I talked about Vietnam. Most places. Finland, that was the one that had a case a long time ago, then 2 weeks without one, then it got reinfected. And an awful lot of these ones, if you look at, say, for instance, Mexico, then Mexico, you've now got 5 cases, but as far as I know, those 5 cases, Mexican ones, they're just part of the Italian outbreak. So it doesn't respect borders, as the Chinese are so sure about. So you've got all these here, these 1,600 cases I was just talking about. And then an awful lot of the new cases around the world are from China. But it doesn't really make any difference to the system of containing it, whether they stay in Italy or whether they travel to another country. And the WHO say that land borders, it doesn't really help to close in Italy. There's no point in closing all the borders to Italy. All that does is stop the legitimate travel, but people will travel through in other ways. They'll evade the border guards, they will fly to another country and then fly to where they want to go to, unless it doesn't actually work. So what does work is a proper lockdown of an area with community spreading, and that's what they did in Wuhan. And that was the key to the Chinese approach. So that was what I was going to explain there, and I just missed earlier, so I'll say that now. So if you look at this, these are the cities in Italy that are under lockdown. And you can go and visit this map, bring it up in a new window, and you can update the map. If you scroll down the page, and here's the map. And then you can zoom in, zoom out, and you can find out. So there we are. There's one there, and then there's the remaining 10 are there. You can zoom in on this map and see where they all are. And those all those cities are under lockdown in China. It's little cities, and the other ones aren't. And the military are involved just as police, just in order to increase the numbers of the police, because they just didn't have enough. And these people are not permitted to leave. So you get people saying, "Oh, China does it, can do it because it's an authoritarian regime." But that's not really how it works. Any country can do that, because it is permitted to restrict someone's liberty, even in a country with very strong human rights, very strong views of rules of protecting your liberty and freedom of speech. But if you can harm others by an action, then it is legitimate to restrict your liberty. And that is central to democracies and free governments around the world. It is legitimate to restrict someone's liberties if they are harming others. Like if you go mad and you go around with an axe and you're trying to kill people, of course it's legitimate to restrict your liberty. If you like throwing stones onto railway lines and hear big boulders and hearing the sound of it, you're a little bit, you're someone who's you're learning deficient. I don't know what the word is for it, and you don't have any idea of the consequences of what you're doing. Then your liberty has to be restrained, sadly. There's some method has to be found to prevent you doing this. So you don't need to have any intention to harm anyone. And so it's rather similar with the quarantine. And there can be people who think, oh, I'm sure I haven't got it, I'll just leave. They don't have any intention to harm anyone, but they're not permitted to leave for this reason. Just like the person who's sort of learning deficient, who wants to throw big boulders onto railway lines. You just have to be restrained, people who do that. So this is, so Italy is doing that. And so that is why I am so hopeful about Italy. They're doing everything right. They're doing exactly what China did. So now, I said that this good news is not shared by the mainstream media. However, the WHO works person to person, government to government, with the various governments around the world. They go to WHO for help. WHO comes and advises them. So the Italian government will be being advised directly, their health ministers, the health professionals, the experts who have been from China, they'll be video conferencing with them or visiting them. So they know what to do. The CDC in the United States. Now, when Trump gave his speech, yesterday was the day before, I was rather surprised. So I'm not a Trump fan in many ways. I mean, many things that he's done that I think is really bad, I don't approve of, and so I wouldn't vote for him. But on some things, he is really good. So I think he's really understood North Korea, and that he's really been spot on with their negotiations. And I think that he is spot on with this. He did exactly the right thing, and in his speech, then he showed a level of understanding of science that I haven't seen in any of the journalists that were asking him the questions. I haven't seen on the BBC in their news reporting. So, to my surprise, Trump understands this in a way that very few people seem to do. So, I think the United States is in good hands, basically because Trump has understood this, and he's very important there. And then he has given full authority to the CSSE, and he's appointing the right people to lead it. So, and the same thing is happening in Italy. It is obvious from what they've done. So now, you might say, it's going up so fast, how can they be doing it right? Well, what you've got to bear in mind is that since way back then, then there have been these infections happening, and these are the detections when the symptoms start. And even some of them, they may have had the symptoms for some time and only just being tested now. And so it's only, the lockdown is only sometime around then, whenever it was. And from then on, they could be up to, you can expect it to a big increase, at least for several days after the shutdown. Because it takes typically up to 3 days for half of the people who are infected to show symptoms. So you do lockdown suddenly now. 3 days later, you've still got half of the infected. You've only got half of the people who were infected back then have shown symptoms of the newly infected. And when you've got an outbreak doubling every 3 days, then most of the people infected will be newly infected. So you can expect it to zoom up and up for quite a few more days. And so you expect to go like that and then level off like that. And if they have completely contained it, then expect to go something like that, then level off, and that would be like a week from now it would starting to level off, and 2 weeks from now then it would be tapering off quite significantly if they've almost certainly contained it, and that will probably be several thousand by then. And they should really do all the cases around the world, not just in Italy, that are connected back to this outbreak. Then you can expect, maybe 2,000-3,000 of them. Don't be alarmed if the 3,000, 5,000 cases even with Italy, because that won't mean it's not containing it. It's still containing it at a much earlier level than Wuhan, so it probably won't go up to tens of thousands in Wuhan. So why did Wuhan go so high? Just quickly say on that. It's because in Wuhan, then it was going from sometime in November. The first detection was the 1st of December. 2 people who had no connection with each other. One from Wuhan market, one with no connection to Wuhan market. It must have been some previous thing that led to them both having it. Either that or it had two separate sources. And it seems quite possible that it was brought from somewhere else to Wuhan market, and nobody knows where. So, and those are just the very severe cases. So we talked about mid-November, probably when it started. And it was only 11th of January when they published the gene sequence. It was towards the end of January that they realised how serious it is. So Wuhan is like this, and these are just they know to test for it. They can test the gene sequence. If it was Wuhan, you'd only be detecting a few by now. In fact, if it was Wuhan, you wouldn't know it had happened yet. And it'd be really quite a bit further on before they even know it's happened. And then it would be a lot further on before they can start testing it. So that's why Wuhan went up to tens of thousands. And you don't expect that to happen with Italy. So if they're doing the same thing that Wuhan did, they should stop at a few thousand. They shouldn't go up as far as tens of thousands. So that hopefully it'll be a few thousand. Same with Iran. So Iran has still got South Korea. Now South Korea is just slightly levelling off. South Korea, they had this big church and with several 100,000 members, and they interviewed every single member of that church. They're doing all the contact tracing, they're doing everything right in South Korea. South Korea, like Italy, has very good healthcare system. It's very well funded. I mean, I don't know about the coverage in Italy, but certainly they've got they're G7 country, and South Korea is like that too. It's one of the wealthiest countries indeed in the world. It's similar to Japan. So there's no problem at all with South Korea having the funding to everything that's needed. And so I expect the South Korean one to taper off. Now we come to Iran. And Iran, they must have, to have 54 deaths, Iran has very good healthcare too. It's the tourist destination for healthcare, health tourism from India and Pakistan and parts of Europe. Then people go to Iran because the living costs are low, the healthcare costs are low, and the equipment is just so great. They have very, very high-tech equipment in Iran and well-trained doctors. And they export equipment as well. They actually invent new kinds of medical scanners in Iran. So they're quite impressive medically. And they're also very experienced in dealing with epidemics. So even though they've got a low GDP, they're quite good on the medical care. And they have the WHO say that when they dealt with earthquakes and things like that, then Iran gives top quality care to the victims. So they think that these 54 is not due to poor healthcare. It is probably because they have a very large undetected population. So if you just multiply out, I think you get maybe, what was it? I think you got 6,000 or something. Well, I could do the calculation. Let's do it. 54 times 1,007. You would expect them to have 7,000. No, yes, so that's the 7 cases per 1,000 that die if you have good health care. They have 54 deaths. Yes, so they should have 7,000 undetected, if I got that right. You have the same proportion as 1,000 over 7. You have 54 over 77,000. 7,000. 7,000 over 54 is the same as 1,000 over 7. So if you go back to this then, so probably Iran is the biggest of all these outbreaks. It's probably got 7,000 already. But they do have the capability, so maybe not so much, it could be different, because if for instance you've got more elderly people get infected, then you get a much higher death rate. And if for some reason it's spreading preferentially amongst 80-year-olds, say, I mean, then you will get many more deaths. So that's another possible reason for it. If there's a very strange age distribution, for instance. And in Europe, we're likely to get a bit higher than 7 over 1,000 because we've got more older elderly people than there are in China. And so anyway, but it's probably well into thousands. It's not just 978, it's surely a lot more than that. So Iran is a bit of a concern, but it's also really, it's not a bad country to have had it. The main problems is that the WHO are not managing to get people to are having difficulty getting medicine into Iran. Iran is having difficulty buying the medicine because of the sanctions, even though it's supposed to be an exemption to the sanctions. But banks are very unwilling to process the orders because they're afraid that the US is going to sanction them for it, even though it's an exemption. So we need more clarity on this and very swiftly. And the WHO are having a bit of difficulty sending their team into Iran. I would say that's top priority. Probably it's been cleared by now, but they have been having these problems. And I think Iran is the top priority of these 3 outbreaks. South Korea certainly is going to contain it. I can't see why they can't. If the China can with Wuhan, I really don't see why. Italy is doing everything right. Surely they will contain it. And Iran, they certainly have the capability to contain it, but they need a lot of help. And so hopefully that help is flowing their way, and they're going to contain it. And they've done many measures already. They've banned the use of these pipes I was telling you about, closed schools and universities, stopped the Friday prayers. So it's religious gatherings where you have very close connection of the people together, and that's another situation as happened in South Korea. So yeah, that's a bit about the necessary sanctions. WHO have managed to send them the medical test kits so they can test for it, and supplies as donations. So they have sent some things there. But yes, hopefully they've got there now. So, yes, here is my list of countries I was going to tell you. I thought it was at the beginning, that's what I was looking for earlier on. So there's 16 cases with countries with only 1 case, 15 countries with almost 10, 16 with more than 10 and less than 100, and only 5 countries with over 100, plus the Diamond Princess. And 35 countries have only got imported cases, and only 16 countries have some cases of local transmission. That was situation for 39. And 9 countries with no new cases for more than 2 weeks: Belgium, Cambodia, India, Nepal, Philippines, Russian Federation, Sri Lanka, and Vietnam. And nearly all of those cases in those 9 countries have recovered. So let's double check those. So we've got Belgium, and then we've got India, before you see, Vietnam, Cambodia, the Philippines, and that's where the one existing. And then what else were there? The other ones: Philippines, Russian Federation, Nepal with Russian Federation. So Nepal, that's one confirmed recovered. And by the way, for instance, in the Tibetan region of China, there's only one, but that's not counted as separate, and it's recovered. Sorry, I'm looking for Russian Federation. Russian Federation, 2, both recovered. All of these haven't had any new cases for 2 weeks. And then what was the last one? Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka as well. one confirmed. None of these have had any cases for 2 weeks. And that just would not happen if this was a non-contained pandemic. I talked about that, I talked about the first case in Nigeria. So I think that's everything that I was going to say. So I think all eyes should be on Iran at this point, but also in Africa. And I told you, I said earlier on, the other good news that nobody's told everyone, that just hadn't been on the news at all, is that WHO now has their funding that it asked for urgent supporting of of strengthening the response in Africa and other places with poor healthcare. That's the Nigerian case. And so they've been strengthened as well. They've got the support of the WHO, the entire of Africa. And the WHO talked about the importance of a coordinated response, and all of Africa, the borders are very leaky, and the entire country, the entire continent is working together. Oh, that's a new case there, is it? Ecuador. So a little thing in Ecuador. I didn't know about that. I have to look up the news. And that's the two in Brazil, and those are both from Italy. I expect it's from Italy, but I have to look it up. But anyway, South America, then the WHO are less concerned about South America because, despite the huge amounts in Europe, then it's not the major focus of concern. The major focus of concern is Africa, and trying to make sure it doesn't get into Africa, because it would be quite hard, especially so. And then they're preparing them for one case. So if you start getting cases in Africa, don't worry yet, because they have coordinated response and they're working all the way through that. And they're preparing them for one case, then for 100 cases, and then eventually they want to prepare them for 1,000 cases. And so even if you have there's 100 cases in Nigeria or something, it's not likely to happen because it's being very well contained, and most countries. So remember, most countries they're just very well contained. But if you get a big outbreak, still do remember that now the WHO has all this funding of $123 million that they are already using to strengthen the Africa and other countries which need their help. So South America needs its help too, although South America is much stronger than Africa. And that's the other very good news that we have. So China is the first line of defense, and they have done a very good job of stopping it spreading. Extremely rigorous. Then Europe and the Middle East with Iran, we are the second line of defense, and South Korea, we have to contain it too, not just for our own sake, but for the entire world, including Africa. So you see, if it went to Africa and it wasn't contained, then, and suppose you had something like this, the Iran situation in Africa, it's not very so far away. Suppose you had 7,000 in, say, the Congo or Sudan or something, then that would be just about impossible for Africa to cope with, because they just don't have a health system to deal with contact tracing of 7,000 people through the countryside of Congo and in war and in conflict situations. It'd be very, very difficult for them to do. So we are the second line of defense. We must stop it from getting to Africa. And if it gets to Africa, then it's very difficult to stop a pandemic at that point. So if it gets to Africa in a big way, I mean thousands. If it gets to Africa in just one or two, a few cases here and again, even a few hundred cases in Africa, even 1,000 cases in some country or other in Africa, then we can still contain it. But if we get something like this in Africa, then at that point. So another thing we're doing with this is we are delaying. So we need the solidarity, all of us together. If there's even one weak point, one country that doesn't do this containing, they then become a seed for the entire world. So it's very, very, very important for all of us to be working together to do this. And then even if we don't manage to contain it, so there's still an excellent chance, narrowing window of opportunity, but it's an excellent chance because things are just turning around. People often rise to the occasion when things go bad. Then, as the worse things get, the more people rise to it. And this is what the WHO are trying to get people to do. And sadly, our reporters are rather getting in the way by telling people to give up. But if they can convince people to rise to the situation, we have a tremendous ability as a human, as our species. We're very good at rising to a difficult situation. And that's what we need to do. And then, once we've done that, then at the very least, though, all that we've done so far is delaying it. And the more you delay it, then, for instance, delay it to the end of the flu season makes a very big difference to the hospital beds in Northern Europe. Much easier to deal with it. Delaying any delay throughout the world is giving us more time for the vaccines, and we have 20 vaccines, and more than 20 vaccines, different ones, different ideas of how to do it, already under development and in trials and so on. Some of them already starting the animal trials and things. And usually a year or a year and a half would be very fast, but these are building on the news on methods already available for SARS vaccines, which have been almost finished but not been rolled out. So we also, the more we delay it, the more we have the possibility of a vaccine the more the vaccine can then has a smaller population to deal with by the time we get to a vaccine. So either we are going to stop it, and I think there's a good possibility that we stop it, and then if not, we are certainly delaying it. And it's not a pandemic yet, and it never needs to be a pandemic if we act as vigorously as the Chinese have done. So that's the good news, that the mainstream press just don't seem to be, they seem to have lost the plot a bit. We can do it, we can stop it. And so they'll stop it. So I'd be very surprised if Italy doesn't stop it and South Korea don't stop it. And I think Iran can stop it if it gets the support it needs. And which surely it will. And then it's a matter of very, very strong, careful to keep it out of Africa. That's a top priority. Everyone else will be able to stop it. And then in Africa, if it does get there, to be very, very fast at acting, to make sure that you get it right away and it doesn't increase to like more than 1,000 cases would be very difficult in an African country. And that's what we have to do. Anyway, so that's the end of this. Hopefully it's helped some of you who are getting scared. And yes, just remind you of our group, Facebook group, Doomsday Debunked. I'll end with the reminder at the top of the page. So just remember, it is being contained in many places around the world. And yes, our Facebook group, Doomsday Debunked, if you want to help with debunking, with helping scared people, reassuring them, if you're good at that sort of thing, and if you're scared and you need help, then do join our group and see the rules at the head of the